I came home from a 12-hour shift at the construction site to find a bright orange notice stapled to my front door, and the words "Foreclosure Proceedings Initiated" were printed in bold letters across the top. My hands were still covered in drywall dust as I ripped the paper off the door, leaving a small tear in the wood where the industrial staple had been driven too deep. The notice claimed I owed the Pleasant Valley Homeowners Association over $8,000 in unpaid fees, late penalties, and legal costs. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read through the document twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I had bought this modest 3-bedroom ranch in Greenville, South Carolina, just 18 months ago, and I had been meticulous about paying every single bill on time. The HOA fees were automatically deducted from my checking account on the first of every month without fail. I unlocked my door and went straight to my home office, not even bothering to take off my work boots. My laptop took what felt like an eternity to boot up while I rifled through my filing cabinet, pulling out every bank statement from the past year and a half. The automatic payments were all there, clear as day. January through December of last year, then January of this year. $55 on the first of each month, like clockwork. I had never missed a single payment, never been late, never even been close to late. The foreclosure notice listed a court date exactly 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to prove I had paid everything I owed, or I would lose my house. The house I had saved for 7 years to afford. The house where I had finally started to build a real life after my divorce from my ex-wife, Jennifer, left me starting over at 32 years old. I grabbed my phone and called the number listed on the notice for the HOA management company. A woman answered on the 4th ring with a nasal voice that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Pleasant Valley HOA, this is Brenda speaking." "My name is Warren Matthews," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just got home and found a foreclosure notice on my door. There has to be some kind of mistake because I have proof I have paid every single HOA fee since I moved in. Hold, please." The line went silent for almost 5 minutes. I paced back and forth across my kitchen, watching the second hand on the wall clock tick by with agonizing slowness. When Brenda finally came back on the line, her tone had shifted from bored to irritated. "Mr. Matthews, our records show you have failed to pay your HOA fees for the past 16 months. You were sent multiple notices about the outstanding balance." "That's impossible," I said. "I have bank statements right here in front of me showing automatic payments going out every single month. I never received any notices about unpaid fees." "Well, our records clearly indicate otherwise. If you wish to dispute this, you will need to appear at the court date listed on your notice with any documentation you believe supports your case. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "Yes, I need to speak to someone in charge, a supervisor or the HOA president." "The board president is Deborah Winters. She does not take calls directly, but I can schedule you for the next board meeting, which is in 6 weeks. 6 weeks? My court date is in 3 weeks. I am sorry, but that is the earliest available meeting slot. Have a nice day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone and trying to process what had just happened. Someone was trying to take my house based on a lie, and the people responsible would not even talk to me about it. I had never felt so powerless in my entire life. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My foreman was not happy about it, but I did not care. I had bigger problems. I spent 2 hours at my bank getting official statements printed and notarized, complete with the routing numbers showing exactly where my HOA payments had been going each month. The bank manager, A soft-spoken man named Gerald looked over the documents with a concerned expression. "These payments are definitely going through," Gerald said, tapping his pen against the printed statements. "See here. Every first of the month, $55 to Pleasant Valley HOA Management Services. Never bounced, never returned. Someone is receiving this money. Can you tell me anything else? Like who is actually cashing these checks or where the money goes after it leaves my account?" Gerald pulled up something on his computer and frowned. "It goes into an account registered to Pleasant Valley HOA Management. That is all I can see from my end. You would need to subpoena their banking records to see what happens to the funds after that." I left the bank with a thick folder of documentation and drove straight to the address listed on the foreclosure notice. Pleasant Valley HOA Management operated out of a dingy strip mall between a nail salon and a dollar store. The office had brown water stains on the ceiling tiles and smelled like old coffee and mildew. A receptionist who looked barely out of high school sat behind a desk, scrolling through her phone. "I need to see someone about my account," I said. "Today, right now." She did not even look up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this is an emergency. Your company is trying to foreclose on my house for fees I have already paid. You need an appointment." "The earliest I have is next Wednesday at 3. "That is not good enough. Someone needs to look at my account right now and fix this mistake before it goes any further." The girl finally looked up at me, her expression flat and uninterested. "Sir, if you keep raising your voice, I am going to have to ask you to leave." I realized my hands were shaking. I took a deep breath and forced myself to speak calmly. "Please, I am not trying to cause problems. I just need someone to look at my payment records and compare them to what you have in your system. There is clearly an error somewhere. Fill out this form, and we will review your account within 10 business days." She slid a piece of paper across the desk without making eye contact. 10 business days. I have a court date in less than 3 weeks. That is our policy. If you do not like it, you can take it up with the board. I filled out the form right there, my handwriting barely legible because my hands would not stop shaking. I attached copies of my bank statements and asked for a receipt. The receptionist stamped the form, made a photocopy, and handed it back to me without a word. I walked out of that office knowing I was not going to hear back from them in time, if at all. That evening, I started calling lawyers. The first 3 I contacted did not handle HOA disputes. The fourth told me her retainer fee was $5,000, and she was booked solid for the next 2 months. The fifth lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen, at least listened to my story before delivering bad news. "Mr. Matthews, HOA foreclosure cases are extremely difficult to fight, especially on short notice. Even with your bank statements, they can claim the money went to the wrong account or that you owed additional fees you were not aware of. These cases almost always favor the HOA because judges assume the association has proper documentation." "But I have proof I paid," I said. "Does not that count for something?" "It should, but in practice, it often does not matter. HOAs have a lot of power in South Carolina. If I took your case, I would need a $10,000 retainer, and I cannot guarantee we would win. I am sorry, but that is the reality." I thanked her and hung up. $10,000 might as well have been 10 million. After my divorce and the down payment on the house, my savings account had maybe $4,000 in it. I was barely keeping my head above water as it was. For the next week, I could not eat, could not sleep, could barely focus at work. My coworker, Danny, noticed I was not myself and finally cornered me during lunch break. Danny was in his 50s, a former Marine with a gray buzz cut and a no-nonsense attitude. I told him everything while we sat in his truck, eating sandwiches that tasted like cardboard in my mouth. "You need a lawyer," Danny said immediately. "My cousin Ralph handles this kind of stuff. Real estate disputes, HOA problems, all that. Let me give him a call." "I cannot afford a lawyer, Danny. I have already called 5 of them. Ralph is not like those corporate types. He actually gives a damn about people. Just talk to him before you give up." Danny called his cousin right there in the truck. After a brief conversation, he handed me the phone. Ralph had a deep, gravelly voice with a thick southern accent. "Danny tells me you are in a bind with your HOA. Tell me what happened." I went through the whole story again, from the foreclosure notice to the bank statements to the runaround I had gotten from the HOA management company. Ralph listened without interrupting, occasionally making a thoughtful noise. "How much can you afford for a retainer?" Ralph asked when I finished. "Maybe $2,000 if I max out my credit card. I know that is not much. It will do. I want you to come by my office tomorrow with all your documentation. Bring every piece of paper you have related to this house and the HOA. Bank statements, the foreclosure notice, copies of your mortgage, everything. Can you do that?" "Yes, absolutely, thank you. Do not thank me yet. We have a fight ahead of us, son." Ralph's office was in a converted house in downtown Greenville, nothing fancy but clean and professional. Ralph himself was a bear of a man, probably 6'4" and built like he had played football in his younger days. He was in his early 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that did not miss anything. We spent 3 hours going through every document I had brought. He made notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally muttering to himself. "This stinks to high heaven," Ralph said finally. "Your bank statements are crystal clear. You have been paying every month like clockwork. But look at this foreclosure notice. It claims you have not paid since you moved in. That is not a simple accounting error. That is fraud." "Fraud? You mean they are lying on purpose?" "I mean someone is either stealing your payments or deliberately falsifying records to justify a foreclosure. Both scenarios are fraud. The question is who and why. Do you have any enemies on the HOA board? Anyone who might have it out for you?" I shook my head. "I barely know anyone in the neighborhood. I work long hours and mostly keep to myself. I have never even been to an HOA meeting." "Well, someone wants your house bad enough to commit fraud to get it. We need to figure out who that is." Ralph leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his legal pad. "Here is what we are going to do. First, I am going to file a motion with the court to delay the foreclosure proceedings while we investigate. Second, I am going to subpoena the HOA's financial records. If they are stealing from you, there will be a paper trail. Third, I want you to go to your next HOA meeting and observe. Do not make a scene. Do not confront anyone. Just watch and listen. People get careless when they think they are among friends. When is the next meeting? According to their bylaws, they meet the second Tuesday of every month. That is tomorrow night, 7 p.m. at the community center." Ralph pulled out a contract and slid it across the desk. "This is my standard retainer agreement. $2,000 gets you through the initial court date and the investigation. If this goes to trial, we will discuss additional fees, but I will work with you on payment plans. Fair enough." I signed the contract without hesitation. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The Pleasant Valley Community Center was a small brick building near the neighborhood entrance. I arrived at 7:15, hoping to slip in unnoticed. About 20 people sat in folding chairs facing a table where 5 board members were seated. I recognized Brenda from the management company at a side table, typing on a laptop. The woman in the center of the board table was clearly in charge. She was in her mid-50s with highlighted blonde hair styled in that aggressive Karen cut that seems to be standard issue for HOA presidents. She wore too much makeup and a navy blue pantsuit that looked expensive. A nameplate in front of her read, Deborah Winters, President. 2 men and 2 women sat on either side of her, all middle-aged and wearing similar expressions of self-importance. "Next order of business," Deborah said, reading from a sheet of paper. "We have 3 properties currently in foreclosure proceedings due to non-payment of fees. 2 of those properties are likely to be acquired by the HOA within the next 60 days, at which point we will renovate and sell them for market value. The proceeds will go into the Community Improvement Fund." My blood ran cold. They were talking about my house, and 2 others. An elderly man in the audience raised his hand. "Deborah, I have a question about the foreclosures. What happens to the people living in those houses?" "They had ample opportunity to pay their fees," Deborah said with a dismissive wave. "Multiple notices were sent. If they chose to ignore those notices, that is their problem, not ours. This HOA has rules and rules must be followed." "But what if there was a mistake?" another resident asked. "What if someone can prove they paid?" Deborah's smile did not reach her eyes. "Our records are impeccable. I personally oversee all financial matters. If our system says someone has not paid, they have not paid, period." I bit my tongue to keep from standing up and calling her a liar right then and there. Ralph had been clear about staying quiet and just observing. I took out my phone and started recording the audio, keeping the phone in my lap where no one could see it. The meeting dragged on for another 40 minutes, mostly discussions about landscaping contracts and paint color approvals. I watched Deborah carefully. She had a way of shutting down any dissenting opinions or questions that challenged her authority. The other board members barely spoke except to agree with whatever she said. It was clear who really ran this HOA. As the meeting ended and people started filing out, I approached Brenda at the side table. She looked up at me with that same bored expression from the phone call. "I am Warren Matthews. We spoke on the phone about the foreclosure notice." Her expression did not change. "Yes. I dropped off documentation showing I have paid all my fees. Has anyone reviewed that yet? I will check on it." She turned back to her laptop, clearly dismissing me. "When can I expect a response?" "My court date is in 2 weeks. I said I will check on it." Her tone had an edge now. Deborah Winters appeared beside us, and up close, I could see the hardness in her eyes despite her fake pleasant smile. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem," I said evenly. "I am just following up on documentation I submitted about my account." "Your name?" "Warren Matthews. 17 Oak Ridge Drive." Something flickered across her face, too quick to read. "Oh yes, Mr. Matthews, I am very familiar with your situation. You have been delinquent on your fees since you moved into this neighborhood. We have been more than patient with you. I have bank statements proving I have paid every single month." "Bank statements can be doctored. Our records are what matter, and our records clearly show non-payment. If you have an issue with that, you can take it up with the judge." She turned to Brenda. "Is there anything else?" "No, madam." "Good. Mr. Matthews, I suggest you start looking for alternative housing arrangements. We will be taking possession of your property very soon." Deborah walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. I left the community center shaking with anger. The way Deborah had looked at me, the cold certainty in her voice, the complete dismissal of my evidence. This was not about unpaid fees. This was something else entirely. I called Ralph as soon as I got in my car and told him everything, including the comment about acquiring properties and selling them for market value. "That is it," Ralph said. "That is the motive. They are stealing houses and flipping them. How much did you pay for your house?" $180,000. "And what is it worth now?" The house next to mine just sold for $230,000. The market has gone up a lot in the past year. So they foreclose on your house for $8,000 in fake fees, fix it up a little, and sell it for a $50,000 profit. Probably more if they do the renovations themselves using HOA funds. Classic real estate fraud scheme. Ralph was quiet for a moment. This is bigger than I thought. If they are doing this to multiple properties, we might be looking at organized criminal activity. I am going to contact the other 2 homeowners in foreclosure and see if they will talk to me. We might be able to build a class action case. What do I do in the meantime? Keep your head down and document everything. Save that recording from tonight. If Deborah or anyone from the HOA contacts you, record it if you can. South Carolina is a one-party consent state, so as long as you are part of the conversation, it is legal. And start looking into Deborah Winters. Social media, public records, whatever you can find. I want to know everything about her. I spent the next 3 days becoming an amateur investigator. Deborah Winters had lived in Pleasant Valley for 12 years and had been HOA president for the past 8. Her late husband had been a real estate developer before he died of a heart attack 5 years ago, leaving her with a substantial life insurance payout according to public records. She drove a brand new Mercedes and took frequent vacations to Europe based on her Facebook posts. Her house was the largest in the neighborhood, a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial that had to be worth at least $400,000. What I found most interesting was a property management company called Serenity Properties LLC, registered in Deborah's name. According to the business filings, it had been created 3 years ago. The company had no website and no public presence that I could find. Just a P.O. box and Deborah listed as the sole owner. I called Ralph with my findings. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. I think we just found where the stolen houses are going, Ralph said. She forecloses through the HOA, then her private company buys the properties at a discount, renovates them, and sells them for market value. All the profit goes straight to her. Brenda from the management company is probably in on it too. Maybe the rest of the board, maybe not. We need those financial records. Did you file the subpoena? Filed it 2 days ago. The HOA's lawyer is fighting it, but the judge will rule in our favor. These things take time, though. Your court date is in 10 days. We might not have the records by then. So what happens at the court date? We present your bank statements and argue that the foreclosure is fraudulent. Without the HOA's financial records, it is going to be your word against theirs. The judge might delay the foreclosure to allow time for investigation, or he might rule in the HOA's favor and order you to pay the claimed amount or vacate. It could go either way. That is not very reassuring. I know, son, but I am not going to lie to you. HOA law is stacked in their favor. We need a smoking gun, and we need it fast. The smoking gun arrived 3 days later in the form of a nervous young woman who showed up at my door at 9 p.m. She was maybe 25, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail and scared eyes. She kept looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to jump out of the bushes. "Are you Warren Matthews?" she asked in a hushed voice. "Yes, who are you?" "My name is Emily. I work at Pleasant Valley HOA Management. I process the payments." She pulled a flash drive from her pocket. "I could lose my job for this. I could get sued. But what they are doing is wrong, and I cannot just stay quiet anymore." "What who is doing? What is on that drive?" "Everything. The real financial records. Deborah and Brenda have been stealing HOA payments for 3 years. They have 2 sets of books. One shows what homeowners actually pay, the other shows false delinquencies. When someone is marked delinquent for long enough, they file foreclosure. Most people do not have the money to fight it, so they lose their houses. The HOA buys the property cheap. Then Deborah's company buys it from the HOA and sells it for profit. You are the sixth house they have done this to. My hands were shaking as I took the flash drive. Why are you telling me this now? Because I found out today that I am next. I bought a condo in Pleasant Valley 2 years ago. I have been paying my fees through automatic withdrawal, same as you. But Brenda showed me the official records this afternoon, and they show I am 4 months behind. She told me to keep it quiet, and they would work something out with me. But I know what that means. They are going to do to me what they did to you and the others. I am done being part of this. You need to talk to my lawyer, right now. I called Ralph and put him on speaker. Emily repeated her story, her voice shaking. Ralph asked her dozens of questions, many of which I did not understand but which seemed important. Finally, he asked the big one. Emily, are you willing to testify to all this in court? I am willing to do whatever it takes to stop them, but I need protection. Deborah has connections. I am afraid of what she might do if she finds out I talked. I will file for a protective order tomorrow morning. In the meantime, do you have somewhere safe you can stay? Family out of town. My sister lives in Charlotte. I can go there tonight. Do it. Pack a bag and leave right now. Do not tell anyone at work where you are going. Do not post anything on social media. Just disappear for a few days until we can get you in front of a judge. Emily left 5 minutes later, driving away with her taillights disappearing into the darkness. I went inside and plugged the flash drive into my laptop. What I found made my stomach turn. Spreadsheets showing the real payment records for over 200 homes in Pleasant Valley. Most showed regular, on-time payments, but scattered throughout were highlighted entries marked with red flags. My house, Emily's condo, 4 other properties, all marked with notes like target for acquisition and foreclosure timeline initiated. There were also bank statements showing wire transfers from Pleasant Valley HOA to Serenity Properties LLC. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over 3 years. But the most damning evidence was an email chain between Deborah and Brenda discussing which properties to target next. They had a whole system. They looked for single owners with no families, people who worked long hours and would not notice the fake warnings right away, properties in desirable locations that would sell for maximum profit. One email from Deborah made me see red. The Matthews property is perfect. Single male, works construction so he is gone all day, quiet type who will not make waves. We can have him out by March and the property listed by May. Should clear at least $60,000 after renovations. BR wants first crack at buying it through her investment group. BR had to be Brenda. They were not even hiding it anymore. They had gotten so comfortable with their scheme that they were discussing it in writing. I forwarded everything to Ralph, then made backup copies on 2 more flash drives. One went in my safe deposit box at the bank. The other I mailed to my brother in Virginia with a note explaining everything. If something happened to me, I wanted someone to have the evidence. The next morning, Ralph called me at 6 a.m. We have got them. The judge granted the protective order for Emily, and I am filing an emergency motion to halt all foreclosure proceedings against Pleasant Valley residents pending a fraud investigation. I am also contacting the South Carolina Attorney General's office and the FBI. This is wire fraud, racketeering, possibly more. We are not just fighting a civil case anymore. Deborah Winters is going to prison. What about my court date? Still on the books, but it is going to look very different now. Instead of you defending against foreclosure, we are going on offense. I am countersuing the HOA for wrongful foreclosure, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a few other things. We are also naming Deborah and Brenda individually. They are going to wish they had never heard your name. The week before the court date was chaos. Ralph filed a mountain of paperwork. The local news picked up the story after the Attorney General's office announced an investigation into Pleasant Valley HOA. Reporters started showing up in the neighborhood, trying to interview residents. I declined all comment on Ralph's advice, but other homeowners were not so quiet. It turned out a lot of people had complaints about Deborah and the board, but they had been too afraid to speak up because of retaliation fears. 2 days before court, the FBI showed up at Deborah's house with a warrant. I watched from my window as they carried out boxes of documents and computer equipment. Deborah stood in her driveway in a pink bathrobe, screaming at the agents about harassment and lawsuits. They ignored her. Brenda was arrested at the management office the same day. According to the news, she was charged with wire fraud and conspiracy. Then things got interesting. Brenda decided to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. She gave them everything. Offshore bank accounts where Deborah had been hiding money. A second property management company registered under a shell corporation. Evidence of kickbacks from contractors who did renovation work on the foreclosed properties. Tax evasion, money laundering. The list went on and on. By the time our court date arrived, Deborah Winters was facing federal charges that could put her away for 20 years. But we still had to deal with the civil case. The foreclosure might have been based on fraud, but the HOA's lawyer was arguing that the association itself should not be held liable for the actions of rogue board members. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled with Pleasant Valley residents who wanted to see what would happen. Ralph looked confident in a sharp gray suit. The HOA's lawyer, a sweaty man named Charles Hoffman, kept wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. Judge Patricia Thornton entered and everyone stood. She was a black woman in her 60s with silver hair and an expression that suggested she did not tolerate nonsense in her courtroom. She took her seat and looked over the case file for a long moment. "This is quite the mess," Judge Thornton said. "Mr. Hoffman, your client stands accused of attempting to fraudulently foreclose on Mr. Matthews's property based on falsified financial records. How do you respond?" Hoffman stood, tugging at his tie. "Your Honor, the Pleasant Valley HOA had no knowledge of any wrongdoing by its president or management company. The board relied on financial reports provided by Miss Winters and Miss Brenda Patterson. When those reports showed Mr. Matthews was delinquent, the board followed standard procedure for collection and foreclosure. They are victims here as much as Mr. Matthews." "Interesting theory," Judge Thornton said dryly. "Mr. Chen, I assume you have a different perspective." Ralph stood and buttoned his suit jacket. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that the Pleasant Valley HOA board was either willfully ignorant or actively complicit in a scheme to defraud homeowners. Miss Winters could not have operated this fraud alone. She needed the board's approval for foreclosure proceedings, property acquisitions, and fund transfers. At minimum, the board failed in its fiduciary duty to properly oversee the association's finances. At worst, some board members were active participants in the fraud. Let us proceed then." "Mr. Chen, call your first witness." Ralph called me to the stand. I swore to tell the truth and sat down, my heart pounding. Ralph walked me through the timeline. Finding the foreclosure notice, checking my bank records, the runaround from the management company, the threatening conversation with Deborah at the HOA meeting. I remained calm and factual, exactly as Ralph had coached me. "Mr. Matthews, after you received the foreclosure notice, did you attempt to resolve the matter directly with the HOA?" Ralph asked. "Yes. I called the management company, visited their office, and attended an HOA meeting. Each time I was told my bank statements did not matter and that I would have to take it up with the judge. And at the HOA meeting, what did Miss Winters say to you specifically? She said bank statements can be doctored, and that the HOA's records were what mattered. She told me to start looking for alternative housing because they would be taking possession of my property soon. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Thornton banged her gavel once. Order. Ralph showed me several documents on a screen. Mr. Matthews, do you recognize these bank statements? Yes. Those are my official bank records showing automatic payments to Pleasant Valley HOA every month since I moved in. And do you recognize this spreadsheet? Ralph pulled up one of the files from Emily's flash drive. Yes. That is from the HOA's real financial records. It shows my payments were received and recorded, but I was marked as a target for foreclosure anyway. Hoffman objected repeatedly, but Judge Thornton overruled him each time. The evidence was too clear. Ralph then called Emily to the stand. She was nervous but composed, and she walked the court through the dual bookkeeping system in detail. She explained how Deborah would mark certain properties for foreclosure regardless of payment history, and how Brenda would then create false delinquency reports to justify the foreclosure filings. Why did you participate in this scheme? Ralph asked. I did not know it was happening at first, Emily said. I just processed payments like I was told. It was not until about a year ago that I realized there were two sets of books. When I asked Brenda about it, she said it was standard accounting practice and not to worry about it. I was afraid I would lose my job if I pushed, so I stayed quiet. I am not proud of that, but when I found out I was going to be their next victim, I knew I had to do something. Hoffman tried to discredit Emily during cross-examination, suggesting she was lying to avoid her own prosecution. But Ralph had already submitted her cooperation agreement with prosecutors, showing she was facing minimal charges in exchange for testimony. Her story held up. The final witness was a forensic accountant Ralph had hired. He walked the court through 3 years of financial records, showing a clear pattern of theft and fraud. Money that should have gone to landscaping and maintenance had been funneled to Deborah's private company. HOA funds had been used to renovate foreclosed properties, which were then sold through Serenity Properties, with the profits going to Deborah personally. The accountant estimated Deborah had stolen over $700,000 from the HOA and its members. When the testimony ended, Judge Thornton called for closing arguments. Hoffman tried his best to separate the HOA from Deborah's actions, but it was clear his heart was not in it. Ralph hammered home the point that the board had failed in its most basic duty to protect the homeowner's interests. Your Honor, Mr. Matthews came within 3 weeks of losing his home to thieves, Ralph said. Through no fault of his own, through no failure to pay what he owed, he was targeted by criminals who saw his house as nothing more than a profit opportunity. The Pleasant Valley HOA enabled this crime through negligence at best, or active participation at worst. Mr. Matthews deserves compensation not just for the stress and expense of fighting this wrongful foreclosure, but as a message to every HOA in South Carolina that this behavior will not be tolerated. Judge Thornton took less than 10 minutes to make her decision. She returned to the bench with her reading glasses perched on her nose and a thick file in her hands. I have reviewed all the evidence presented today, and I find the following, Judge Thornton said. First, the foreclosure proceedings against Mr. Warren Matthews are dismissed with prejudice. The alleged debt does not exist. Second, I find that Pleasant Valley HOA, through its president Deborah Winters and management company representative Brenda Patterson, did knowingly and intentionally file a false foreclosure claim against Mr. Matthews. Third, I find the HOA board failed in its fiduciary duty by not properly overseeing the association's finances and by rubber stamping foreclosure proceedings without adequate investigation. She paused and looked directly at Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman, your clients should count themselves lucky that I am not referring them for criminal prosecution as well. Their ignorance, whether willful or negligent, enabled serious crimes against the people they were supposed to serve. Judge Thornton turned to me. Mr. Matthews, I am awarding you $50,000 in damages for wrongful foreclosure, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and legal fees. This amount is to be paid by Pleasant Valley HOA within 60 days. I am also issuing a permanent injunction against any further collection actions or harassment by the HOA or its representatives. If they so much as send you an unfriendly letter, I want to know about it immediately. The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Thornton did not even try to stop it this time. I sat in the witness box, barely able to process what had just happened. $50,000. My house was safe. Deborah was finished. Ralph shook my hand as we left the courthouse, both of us grinning like idiots. We did it, son. We actually did it. You did it, I said. I just showed up. You had the courage to fight when most people would have given up. That is what mattered. Now let us go get some lunch. I am buying. We went to a barbecue place downtown and celebrated with pulled pork sandwiches and sweet tea. Other homeowners from Pleasant Valley kept coming up to our table to congratulate me and ask Ralph about suing the HOA for their own grievances. Ralph handed out business cards and told them to call his office on Monday. The aftermath took months to fully play out. Deborah Winters was convicted on 14 federal charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Her assets were seized to pay restitution to the HOA and its victims. Brenda Patterson got 3 years and was banned from ever working in property management again. The rest of the HOA board resigned in disgrace, and a special election was held to replace them. The new board's first action was to hire an independent auditor to review the association's finances and make sure no other schemes were lurking in the books. They also voted to pay my $50,000 judgment immediately, rather than dragging it out. The check arrived 6 weeks after the court date, drawn on the HOA's operating account and signed by the new president, a retired school teacher named Margaret Powell, who seemed genuinely committed to running things honestly. I used part of the money to pay off my credit card and build up my savings again. The rest I put toward a new truck. My old one had 200,000 miles on it and was held together with rust and prayers. I figured I deserved something nice after everything I had been through. The FBI investigation eventually expanded to include 2 other HOAs in South Carolina that Deborah had been consulting with. Apparently, she had been trying to franchise her fraud scheme. Those cases were still working their way through the courts the last I heard. Emily moved back to Pleasant Valley after the trials were over. She got a job at a different property management company and made a point of stopping by my house to check in every few weeks. We became friends. She felt guilty about her role in the scheme, even though she had been manipulated as much as anyone. I told her she had done the right thing in the end, and that was what mattered. Life slowly returned to normal. I went back to work, back to my routine of long days at construction sites and quiet evenings at home. But something had changed. I paid attention now. I went to HOA meetings and asked questions about finances and decisions. Other homeowners started doing the same. We had learned a hard lesson about what happens when you trust the wrong people with power and do not hold them accountable. One evening about 8 months after the trial, I was working in my garage when a car pulled into my driveway. A woman in her 30s got out, clutching a folder to her chest. She looked nervous. "Are you Warren Matthews?" she asked. "That is me. Can I help you? My name is Susan Harper. I live in the Riverside Oaks neighborhood across town. Our HOA just tried to foreclose on my house for unpaid fees, but I have been paying through automatic withdrawal for 3 years. Someone told me you had dealt with the same thing and won. I do not know where else to turn." I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over to her. "Come inside. Let me give you the number for my lawyer. He's going to want to hear your story." As Susan followed me into my house, her shoulders already starting to relax, I realized this might be my life now. The guy who fought the HOA and won. The person people came to when they needed help standing up to petty tyrants and con artists. There were worse things to be known for. I called Ralph and put him on speaker. He listened to Susan's story with the same careful attention he had given mine. When she finished, he asked for her email and promised to send her an information packet about her rights and options. "Thank you," Susan said after we hung up, tears in her eyes. "I have been so scared. I thought I was going to lose everything." "You are not alone," I told her. "That is the first thing you need to know. These people count on you feeling isolated and powerless, but you have rights, and there are people who will help you fight. You are going to be okay." She left an hour later with Ralph's contact information, copies of some of my court documents, and a recommendation for a good forensic accountant. I watched her drive away and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Purpose. Like maybe all the stress and fear and fighting had been for something larger than just saving my own house. Over the next year, I consulted on 4 more HOA fraud cases in South Carolina and Georgia. Ralph made me an official investigator for his firm, paying me to dig into HOA records and interview homeowners. It was not much money, but it felt good to use my experience to help others. We won 3 of the 4 cases. The 4th settled out of court for an undisclosed amount that left the homeowner very happy. Pleasant Valley itself became a model for HOA reform. The new board implemented transparent accounting, posted all financial records online for members to review, and created a dispute resolution process that did not involve lawyers or courts unless absolutely necessary. Monthly meetings went from a handful of board residents to standing room-only affairs where people actually engaged with community governance. It turned out people cared about their neighborhood when they were not being lied to and stolen from. I eventually started dating someone I met at an HOA meeting, of all places. Her name was Amanda Wright, and she had moved to Pleasant Valley right after the Deborah scandal broke. She had heard about what happened and said it gave her confidence that this was a community that would not tolerate corruption. We hit it off over shared frustration with municipal bureaucracy and a love of terrible action movies. 6 months later, she moved into my house. The HOA approved the occupancy change without incident. On the 2-year anniversary of my court victory, Ralph took me out for drinks at a bar downtown. We toasted to justice, to stubborn clients who refused to back down, and to the power of good documentation. "You know, you saved more than your house that day," Ralph said, nursing his whiskey. "You saved that whole neighborhood, probably saved a dozen other people from losing their homes. That takes guts. I was just trying to survive. You did all the real work." "Nah, son. I filed the papers and argued the case, but you had the courage to fight when it would have been easier to walk away. That is rare. Most people faced with what you were facing, they would have given up. Found a new place, moved on, tried to forget. But you stood your ground and demanded accountability. That is what made the difference. I thought about that, about the foreclosure notice on my door and the feeling of helplessness that had consumed me. About the moment I decided to fight instead of flee. Maybe Ralph was right. Maybe courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. Here is to never having to do it again, I said, raising my glass. Ralph laughed. I will drink to that. But of course, we both knew that was not realistic. As long as HOAs existed, as long as people had power over their neighbors with minimal oversight, there would be fraud and abuse, and someone who needed help fighting back. The trick was to catch it early, to shine a light on the corruption before it destroyed too many lives. These days, I keep all my HOA documents in meticulous order. Every payment, every notice, every communication. I attend meetings regularly and ask questions when things do not make sense. I know my rights and the HOA's limitations, and I make sure my neighbors know theirs too. We have a group chat now, all the people who lived through the Deborah years. We watch out for each other and hold the board accountable. It is a small thing, but it matters. My house is worth about $260,000 now according to the latest assessment. The neighborhood has thrived since the scandal, property values climbing steadily as word spread that Pleasant Valley was under new management. Sometimes I think about Deborah in federal prison and wonder if she has any regrets. Probably not. People like her rarely do. They see themselves as smart, as just gaming a system that everyone else is too dumb to exploit. They never think they will get caught, but they do get caught, eventually. Because somewhere there is always a Warren Matthews who refuses to be a victim, a Ralph Chen who believes in justice, an Emily who finds the courage to do the right thing even when it is scary. The system only works when people are willing to use it, to stand up and demand that the rules apply to everyone equally. I learned that lesson the hard way, with a foreclosure notice on my door, and $55 mysteriously disappearing into someone else's pocket every month for over a year. But I learned it, and now I make sure other people know it too. On quiet evenings, I sit on my back deck with Amanda, watching the sun set over the neighborhood I fought so hard to stay in. The house that almost was not mine. The life I almost lost to someone else's greed. And I think about how lucky I am. Not because I won $50,000 or because Deborah went to prison, but because I found out what I was made of when it mattered most. The foreclosure was dismissed. The fraudsters were prosecuted. Justice was served. But the real victory was realizing I did not have to accept injustice just because it came from an official-looking document. I could fight back. I could win. And that knowledge, that confidence, was worth more than any court award. Pleasant Valley is my home now in a way it never was before. I know my neighbors. I know how the HOA operates. I know the warning signs of corruption and how to stop it before it takes root. This community nearly destroyed itself through greed and apathy, but we pulled it back from the edge. We made it better. We made it ours. And if anyone ever tries to take it away again, we will be ready, because we have been through the fire once and we know how to fight. That notice on my door 2 years ago was meant to intimidate me into submission. Instead, it woke me up. It showed me what I was capable of. It changed everything. Sometimes I still drive past that dingy strip mall where the HOA management office used to be. It is empty now, a faded "for lease" sign in the window. Brenda is in minimum security prison in Pennsylvania. Deborah is in a federal facility in Kentucky. Their scheme is over, their victims compensated, their crimes a matter of public record. But somewhere else, in some other neighborhood, another Deborah is probably looking at property records and thinking about how easy it would be to skim a little here, foreclose a little there, make some money off people who will not notice or will not fight back. That is just human nature. Greed and opportunity have always made dangerous partners. The difference now is that stories like mine are out there. Ralph published an article in the South Carolina Law Review about HOA fraud schemes and how to combat them. Local news ran a follow-up story on the one-year anniversary of the verdict. People know this happens. They know how to recognize it. They know they can fight and win. That is the real legacy of Pleasant Valley, not the money I won or the years Deborah is serving. But the knowledge that homeowners have rights, that evidence matters, that the system can work if you are willing to push it. Every person who reads about my case and decides to check their HOA finances, every homeowner who questions an unexpected fee or asks for documentation, every community that implements oversight and transparency because they heard what happened here, that is the victory that keeps on giving. I never wanted to be a crusader or an activist. I just wanted to keep my house, the first real home I had owned in my adult life. But sometimes life pushes you into roles you never expected. Sometimes you find your purpose in the fight to survive. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, that fight makes you into someone stronger than you ever thought you could be. My story is not unique. Across America, HOAs wield enormous power over homeowners with often minimal oversight. Most boards are honest, made up of neighbors trying their best to maintain property values and community standards. But some are not. Some are corrupt or incompetent or drunk on the petty authority they wield over their neighbors' lives. And when that happens, regular people like me have to stand up and demand better. The $50,000 sits in my bank account, most of it anyway. Part safety net, part reminder of what I survived. Every time I see that balance, I remember the terror of thinking I might lose everything. And I remember the moment in court when Judge Thornton ruled in my favor, when justice actually prevailed. Both memories are important. The fear keeps me vigilant. The victory gives me hope. Amanda sometimes asks me if I regret buying a house in an HOA neighborhood. Would I do it again knowing what I know now? The honest answer is I do not know. The HOA added a layer of complication and stress to my life that I never wanted. It nearly cost me my home. But it also introduced me to people I care about, gave me purpose I did not have before, and taught me I was stronger than I thought. Would I trade all that to avoid the pain? I genuinely cannot say. What I can say is this: I am not afraid anymore. Not of foreclosure notices or corrupt board presidents or lawyers with expensive suits. I know my rights. I have evidence and documentation. I have a lawyer who believes in accountability. And I have a community that has my back. That is armor stronger than anything Deborah Winters ever had. The sun is setting on another day in Pleasant Valley. Tomorrow I will wake up in my house, the house I fought for and won. I will go to work, come home, maybe attend an HOA meeting if one is scheduled. Normal life, the life Deborah tried to steal from me. But I will live it with my eyes open now, always watching, always ready. Because I know something that I did not know 2 years ago. I know that ordinary people can fight powerful institutions and win. I know that evidence and persistence can overcome corruption. I know that one person standing up can inspire others to do the same. And I know that my home is mine, truly mine, in a way it never was before I had to fight for it. That foreclosure notice on my door was supposed to be the beginning of the end. Instead, it was a beginning of something else entirely, something better, something real. And for that, as strange as it sounds, I am almost grateful. Almost.